I'm Eric, and welcome to today's story. Let's start today's story by talking about this young girl. This is back in 1981 in Vero Beach, Florida. She's driving down the street, and she's pulled over by a police officer. The cop walks up to her and says to her that her car was identified in a crime, and he wants her to come back with him to the scene of the crime so witnesses there can identify her. So he takes her driver's license and says, "Follow me." So he starts driving. The girl, she's nervous, she's young, she doesn't know what to do. So she follows this sheriff's deputy, and she's following him for a while. All of a sudden, he drives out into the middle of nowhere. She starts getting, she's already scared. So she starts getting really concerned because they're out in the middle of nowhere. And so they go into this, wooded area. The sheriff stops the car. He gets out of the car. When he gets out of the car, he looks over, there's a little creek there. And so the girl notices that, the sheriff notices that there's some people fishing in the creek. And she says that right there, something weird happened, that he kind of changed his demeanor and he got really strange. So he walks over to the car. He's like, looks all frustrated and everything. He hands her back her driver's license, says, "Get lost." And she's like, "What about?" He's like, "Just get lost." So she drives away. She's freaked out. She goes home. She tells her father about the situation. Her father's like, "Something's not right there. Let's go talk to the sheriff." So they go to the sheriff's office. And she tells her story to the sheriff. And the sheriff says, "Okay, well, here's a bunch of pictures of all my deputies. Tell me which one it was." So she points out one of the deputies. She says, "This guy right here." And so the sheriff says, "Well, this guy is a volunteer sheriff. And I'm going to have to talk with him to see what's up." So the sheriff talks to the guy. He says to the guy, "What was this all about?" The guy can't explain it at all. So the sheriff says, "You know what? This is weird. Give me your badge. You're no longer a volunteer sheriff." So that's pretty much it. The sheriff gets rid of him. So fast forward a couple of months, and this woman in Vero Beach, she goes to the doctor's office. She comes out of the doctor's office. When she comes out of the doctor's office, she's about to get into her car, and as she reaches for her door handle, she notices something in the back seat. So she looks, and she sees a half-naked man in the back seat of her car. So she kind of flips out, she screams, and it just so happens that there's a police officer coming out of the doctor's office. And so he comes over. When he comes over, he looks in the back seat and he sees this guy. So he tells the guy, "Get out of the car." This guy gets out of the car. He's got no shirt on. He's holding a mixed drink. He's got like a Ryan Coke in his hand. No shirt on. He gets out of the car and the cop says, "What are you doing?" And the guy explains that him and his wife were having some difficulties. He was following her because she had an appointment at the doctor's office. And so he had saw her. He was afraid that he was going to get caught. So he just jumped in this woman's backseat of this woman's car so his ex-wife didn't see him. And the sheriff was like, the cop is like, "Well, this is kind of peculiar." So he checks the guy's ID, and then he checks his car. When he checks his car, he finds a gun and some rope and some handcuffs. And so the sheriff's like, this cop is like, something's up here. So they end up arresting this guy. They end up charging him for, whatever it was, attempted kidnapping or something like that. And the guy gets charged with it. And so he's charged with this crime. And when he gets charged with this crime, they do a little bit of investigating. They find out that this man had been previously charged with kidnapping and sexually assaulting a woman years ago, and he was never convicted of it. It just kind of disappeared. And it turns out that this guy is the sheriff's deputy, volunteer deputy, David Gore. So he gets arrested. When he gets arrested, they start investigating him more. When they investigate him more, they find out some pretty suspicious stuff about the previous rape and whatnot. And so then there was also a couple of other suspicious crimes in Vero Beach that year, that they started looking at David as a suspect for those crimes. What had happened was, initially, the first crime was, it was a disappearance. There was a family that lived out in by the orange groves, and they had just the man had come to the United States earlier and had got a job, set himself up, and he had just recently brought his wife over and family to the United States to live. And one day, his daughter was coming home from school. She takes the bus to school. She gets off the bus and she starts walking home. When she gets off the bus, there's about a mile from the bus stop to her house, and it's all rural. It's in the Orange Coast, so she's got to walk all by herself. She walks home and she's never seen again once she gets off the bus. He comes home from school first. He comes home from school. He looks around and his mom and his sister is missing. He goes walking around. He can't find it. He calls his dad and he says, "Hey, Pop, they're gone." And the father says, "Okay, well, I'll come home and check it out." So the father comes home, and when he comes home, he notices that the purse is still there. Like the vacuum cleaner, she was vacuuming the living room rug, and the vacuum was still in the middle of the room, which was not like his wife. Everything's gone. He calls the police. They come and do an investigation, and they find nothing. There's really no clues. They don't really have anything to go on, and this case just kind of falls to the wayside because after months, they have nothing. There's another strange disappearance that they also investigated that they had no clues for, was several months after the two Ling women disappeared, the mom and the daughter, was a woman by the name of Judy K. Daly, who one afternoon, she takes her daughter to the beach. Her daughter and her friend, daughter's friend, and herself are going to go to the beach. So they all pack up, they go to the beach, and her daughter and her friend wanted to go where all the cool kids hang out. So they go, she drops them off at one part of the beach where the cool kids hang out, and then the mom wants to relax and just chill. So she goes to another part of the beach and makes arrangements to go pick her daughter back up, at a specific time, rearranged time. So this woman goes to the beach, she's by herself. She's hanging out for a couple hours. It's time to go get her daughter. She packs her stuff up. She goes to her car. When she gets to her car, the car won't start. And she notices that the hood is popped a little bit. She's like, "Well, wait a minute, something strange is happening here." And what happens next is this man walks up to her car and he flashes a badge and he says, "Can I help you?" And she says, "My car won't start." And he's like, "Well, I'm a sheriff's deputy and I can give you a ride someplace. Do you need a ride someplace?" So she gets into the car with him. Well, she's never seen again. She just disappears. And there's no leads on this story whatsoever. Because as far as the police know, she went to the beach, she left her car there, she left her purse there, she left everything sitting there. It was very similar to the Ling women, where all their belongings were there. They just disappeared. There was no plans to leave or anything. And no signs really of any abduction or anything like that. She just disappeared. So when David Gore was arrested for this thing in the backseat of the car, police started investigating him for these other crimes, and he went to jail for a year. And so they kept continuing to investigate, and they put some stuff in the media. And when they put some stuff in the newspaper, some local residents decided to call the police and say, "Hey, you know what? There were some strange incidents with that volunteer deputy with me as well." And they tell a couple stories. They also say that they had seen him in the area of the beach when that woman disappeared, that guy was seen in the area. So now the police are very suspicious. He's turned into their number one suspect for these murders, but he's in jail. So they keep investigating. Well, months later, he gets out of jail, and they're start really watching him hard. So they're keeping a really close eye on him, and they're asking questions to his neighbors, his workmates, his cousin, his ex-wife, his parents. They're interviewing all these people, asking questions about him, and it turns out that his cousin Fred said, "You know what? He's a strange guy, but he's really not that bad." And when they interviewed his ex-wife, she was like, "No, there's something off with this guy. There was some situations that happened when he came home with blood on his shirt, whatnot, that he couldn't explain. There's more to this guy." So the cops are following him, and when he gets out of jail, the cops are following him. The parents of this guy are starting to get pissed because when he got out of jail, he moved in with his parents, and there's cops always out in front of the house. So the family, the parents of this David Allen Gore, decide to make a complaint with the police, say, you know what, he served his time, you don't have anything on him, get lost. So the police have to stop following him so they don't harass this man. So fast forward. Fast forward a couple more months. And there's a 14-year-old boy who's riding his bicycle down the street. As he's riding his bicycle down the street, he hears a gunshot. So he looks over to see where this gunshot comes from, and he sees this naked woman, naked other than a blindfold. Her hands are bound, she's blindfolded, and she's running across this front yard of this home, and she's being followed by a naked man, and he's got a gun. He shoots the woman again. She falls to the ground, and he shoots her again. The kid on the bicycle takes off. He goes home, he calls 911. So the cops show up at this address. They show up at this address, and they're all out front trying to figure out what's going on. All of a sudden they get a phone call again, 911 phone call, saying that there's this man with a gun about 4 blocks away. And so a couple of the police take off, but one car stays behind, and a couple cars take off to go to this other location. They're halfway there, and they get a call from dispatch saying, wait, that call came from inside the house. We traced it to the first house you were at. The guy inside had just called the police and reported this other crime, hoping that the police would go to the other scene that he could take off. Well, it didn't work out that way. So police surround the house. The house is surrounded. The police are trying to figure out what's going on. And they notice that there's a car in the garage, like half in the garage, half in the driveway. Police are looking at it. When they, on closer inspection, they see that there is something dripping out of the trunk of the car. They go and check it out. There's blood dripping from the trunk of the car. They pop the trunk open, and inside is Lynn Elliott, naked and dead. So Lynn Elliott is this 17-year-old girl. Her and her girlfriend decided earlier that day that they were going to go to the beach. They live pretty far from the beach. And they decided they were going to hitchhike to the beach. So Lynn and her friend, who was 14 years old, so I can't use her real name, just call her Reagan, is that Lynn and Reagan decide to hitchhike, and they get picked up by David Allen Gore, who then takes them back to the house. He proceeds to rape them, assault them, whatnot. So the cops find this woman dead in the trunk. Now they storm the house. When they storm the house, they go through all the house, they don't find anything. They hear noise up in the attic. They find this guy, David, hiding up in the attic. As they're removing him from the attic, they find a 14-year-old girl naked inside the attic as well. This is young Reagan. So they question Reagan about what's going on, and she explains that she got picked up while they were hitchhiking, that this guy had picked them up, brought them back to this house. Another guy showed up, and the two men assaulted these young women, and the one tried to get away when he chased her down and he shot her. And so the police were like, wait a minute, 2 men? Who's the other guy? So they take David back to the police station, and they interrogating him, and it turns out this guy starts singing, and he says his cousin, Fred, the guy that the cops had interviewed earlier, and he said, yeah, he was a good guy. Well, it turns out that David said that Fred was involved, and not only involved, he was the brains of the operation. He was the one that told David to snatch these girls. So it comes out that these 2 men, for years, have been abducting women. David starts singing like crazy, and he admits to the crimes of taking the Lynn women, calling up his cousin Fred and saying, hey, I got 2 women, I got one for you. And it turns out that when David ended up getting these women, he would call his cousin Fred and say, I got somebody. His cousin Fred would actually pay him for getting women for him, some sort of bounty for finding these women. So they took him out to the Orange Grove. They sexually assaulted these women, then they dismembered them, and they put them in drums, and then they buried them out in the Orange Groves. Also, David admits to going to the beach that day and picking up Judy Kay Daly. And it turns out that a couple of other women who had said that they had a similar instance as that woman as well, that they were at the beach, their car seemed to not work. Guy came up and said he was going to help them, but these women said, no thanks, I'm going to call somebody else. You got to remember, it's 1981. They didn't have cell phones back then. So David singing, he explains that he did all these crimes, he murdered all these women, he confesses to it, and he says that his cousin Fred was also involved with them. They go to court, and it turns out that they are both tried and convicted of murder. They are both sentenced to a couple of life sentences. And I just want to say, it's a kind of a weird story that these guys were doing this for so long that the guys end up confessing to other crimes, even up in Orlando. They said a couple years earlier, they just went to Orlando, they picked up a couple of young girls hitchhiking and took them out into the field and raped and murdered them. And there's other victims, but they don't even know how many, because these guys were just psychos. So I just want to say one thing about this story is that they've been doing this for years, and they weren't getting caught. And this guy was a sheriff's volunteer, sheriff's deputy. He was out there in the community flashing his badge, using his badge to actually get a hold of women to murder. So I want to focus for a moment now on Lynn Elliott, because I think Lynn Elliott is really the hero in this case. This poor 17-year-old girl who was killed tragically, is that when her friend Reagan was being assaulted in the house, that she decided that she was going to escape, and she ran out of the house. And it must have took a lot of courage for her to try to escape, because here she is, her hands are bound, she's blindfolded, and she's trying to escape. She gets out of the house, she gets into the yard, and David Gore hunts her down and shoots her. But it's what the shots that the young boy on the bicycle hears, it gets the police to show up, and that's how David and his cousin Fred get caught. And it's also how the young girl Reagan was saved. And so Lynn Elliott's courage and bravery to escape helped bring these two horrific monsters to justice and helped save the life of her young friend Reagan. If you like the story, check out some of my other stories at MrE.fan, and thanks for watching.